So thanks, everybody. It's a casual half an hour. It wasn't set up to be some formal outburst for me, although my presentations can be. So feel free to jump in and we can take tangents. AI is an interesting topic. What I mostly want to do is sort of reveal the motivation, perhaps, that drove me to spend time going through this proof of concept, see what I could learn about AI at deeper levels. For those who know me, I'm a career technologist, so I've got a deep technical background that actually goes back to earlier days of AI. So I'm quite knowledgeable, sort of in general, with how it works, how it could work, what it could do, and it's been pretty staggering to see how little historical memory we seem to have about what to do with new technology when it comes out. So I think that was part of my motivation. And then, as you'll see in a couple slides, overarching is this project that, in a way, started, at least conceptually, in the late 1980s around how to solve this problem of endless, cost and time spent on documentation, which really only now did I finally surface a way to potentially address it. And I thought that became the interesting reason to hold this. So I'll go through it. I've got about a dozen slides. Stop me at any time. I'm almost mostly talking to hear myself talk about some of these ideas because they keep evolving pretty rapidly, as I think everybody knows if you're paying attention to AI. And then, if we have time at the end, it'd be great to have a discussion, and I'll stay on for as long as the session allows, and we can keep chatting if that's relevant. So the first thing I've tried to point out, mostly because of my own personal background, is this is not the first new technology to emerge. There have been many over the last many years, and they've all created the same kind of fervor of interest. AI is moving a lot faster than others for a whole bunch of different reasons, but it's still a transformational technology, and almost by its definition, that means we have to be prepared to change. The example I've used the most frequently when I'm talking to people who are less familiar with it is things like the spreadsheet, or if you go back even earlier, the basic calculator. If you think about the idea of a calculator suddenly emerging and how many people that would affect, how many roles it would affect, how many lower end people on the employment scale might have said, my job's at a loss because I don't have to do any paper calculations anymore. It could all be done electronically. That would have created some of the fervor. Now, back then, it didn't have a way to spin itself up to the speed that it is today, but obviously AI does. So let me just sort of get into things, and I'll sort of talk about some of what I've learned. So a lot of what I've tried to do is, if you're familiar with InsideSpin as a website, it was built around trying to collect a bunch of business experiences that I had gathered over my working career. And at the time I left Platespin, which is a business I had started, I had the option or the fork in the road to say, hey, it's a book. It's time to put a book together. And I should author a book, and I should say, of all the great things that happened, Platespin was a big success, and all the reasons why I thought it was successful, and maybe somebody could benefit from that. And at the time, from a style point of view, The Wealthy Barber was popular and a few other books. And I thought that would be me doing something like that. And I realized pretty quickly I wasn't going to create a book. I didn't have the work fortitude and stamina to put a book together. So the blogging style, interfaces came to be, and I thought, well, that's a lot easier for me to do. I'm also very technical, so I could do it all myself. So I put together InsideSpin and started publishing articles to it, and they've been out there since about 2010. So that's sort of the genesis, and you'll see why I say all this at the beginning as we go through it. Oops, here we are. So the project itself, as I mentioned, spans 5 decades. So it's maybe the longest proof of concept around in a while in the tech sector. But it started with a conversation, and I'm not sure if the gentleman's going to attend because he said he had potentially time to, a gentleman named Peter Edison, who I used to work for when I worked at Fulcrum in Ottawa in the 80s and 90s. And we had a lot of documentation needs. We were a technology company publishing an API in the search engine space, which was one of my earlier encounters with AI, or AI-like technology. And we had a lot of documentation to publish. We had programmer manuals, software developer kits, user guides, all kinds of stuff. We had a whole rack of manuals that we would publish with our product. And as you can imagine, it was a big effort to do. And every time the API needed to be updated, it was an impossibility to manage the documentation because you would create another version of the book, publish it again, and then somehow get it out to your customers. And back in those days, it was like getting the yearbook for the encyclopedia with all the changes. It's an impossible management situation for both the person receiving it as well as the publisher. So we sat around just literally one day and said, this is really silly. Why are we doing all this? Wouldn't it be great, and this is kind of the key phrase for me, if we could publish the pages on demand as somebody wanted them? Now, late 80s, not a possibility, but it was an idea that we shared between Peter and I at that time to say, wouldn't this been great? So we finished our drinks, we went on with our lives, and off we went. The company Fulcrum at the time won some awards for documentation. So and I was one of the authors. So we had some interesting experiences publishing documentation and being recognized for the quality of it and therefore the effort required to do it. In 2003, leap ahead a little bit. For me, it was sort of a career experience to start a business and have it take off the ground and have it be very successful. So during those 5 years, a lot more experience was gathered, which led to the either book publish or create the website in 2010. But even at that point in time, am I going to write, a whole array of books? So what I ended up deciding to do at that time, thinking it was very wise, is I thought back to this 1988 topic, and I said, why don't I do the following? Why don't I write the articles that I'm most passionate about now, but at least write the summaries of all the rest of the articles. And at the end of each summary, if somebody wants to see the whole article, I'll give them a little more button. And when they click the more button, it'll record that in my database. It'll send me an email and say, so-and-so has requested the whole article. And through that mechanism, I could create the concept of on-demand, not obviously instantaneous, but if enough people ask for an article, that would tell me that it's now at the top of the list. There's a lot of interest in channel sales, so therefore I'll go write the article on channel sales because I never did it. So I let that sit for a long time, and I have all this data, and I've been driving a lot of the InsideSpin through the analytics, fancy word that everybody knows, through the analytics that tell me where the readers are most interested in. So I took a guess when I first put the website together. These are all the topics. Anybody who does documentation understands that idea, who my user is, what I think they're interested in. You make your best guess and away you go. And unless you tie some analytics to it, as you know, you don't necessarily know what's actually been used or not used. So InsideSpin's been sitting there since about 2010. And then a couple of weeks ago, I thought, maybe I could go back and revisit this idea and actually on demand live generate the missing articles. So I thought, let's go do that as a proof of concept, and that's what this is all about. So integrating AI into authoring and sort of redoing the process to start finishing the job that I started long ago to finish out the website. So that's what this is all about. And then all the learnings is mostly why we're here today. So no surprise, these are 3 things I've sort of helped gather together using ChatGPT. What are the defining elements of the documentation money pit? So the biggest one that I think is still relevant today is how much material is published that has no useful value. Whether you're doing it as a technology company for your customers, whether you're receiving it at home because you bought some commercial thing that came with 50 languages translating how to start up your new snowblower. You're just doing all this stuff because you think it might be needed, and you're spending lots of money, lots of time. And as a lot of companies know, when you publish anything, once you publish it, it sort of freezes it in time. And if it needs to be updated, it's not that easy to go back and get your users updating it. So it's one of the follies of many product designs is how do you flow the changes through to the user so that they are using the most current version of whatever it is so they have the best experience. It's not easy to do, feature, function, documentation, all the same. Benefits, insight, and analytics. It's not that easy to know what people are doing with things, especially when you go through distribution channels and you've got layers and layers and layers of people around you. So that's a big missing piece. And InsideSpin, given it's a website, is able to pile on, aside from the generic things you get from Google Analytics, pile on all the special things that I'm tracking in order to understand what my readers are using the website for. And then the last is chasing relevance. Are the materials still relevant? That's a common thing. Again, Maybe it's a little bit easier to figure it out if it's describing features of a product, but even then it's not that relevant unless you know, the relevance isn't accurate unless you know which features are being used, which as people, again, in product management would know is one of the challenges of the role. You spend a lot of time, based on all studies I've seen, investing in features that aren't used, in which case you're just missing a lot of opportunity to innovate. So this is pretty much off the shelf. So it's the old school way used by 90% of companies. Squeaky wheel drives the life cycle is pretty common. A customer complains, you cycle through making an update, however you publish that update on a website or whatever, and that's the method by which you do your life cycle maintenance. Documentation is often the lowest cost line item in any kind of product plan. That's been my experience, at a macro level, obviously not the pencils and things. And print and web are still, I think, by most people seen as poor solutions for documentation, even though, they have useful value overall. So we want to change this. So we want to challenge the whole concept of it. We want to deal with the budget of creating, validating, publishing, refactoring documentation. We want to address improving our ability to maintain the currency of our documentation, the accuracy of our content. We want to track the return value of all the investments we're going to make. So take the language issue as one of those examples. And my professional discipline remains mostly focused on product management. So that's an area where there's a specific kind of documentation that's needed, and it has different characteristics than, let's say, my InsideSpin website does. As one example, consistency is really important. You can't have the requirements change every time you look at them. Whereas on my website, they could be nuanced in different ways every time you look at it. So I could be a little more dynamic about it than a product manager could. But still the issue is it's challenging to maintain. And once you distribute information in an organization, as you need to change it, it's hard to distribute the change equally and have people realize how to absorb it because it's not that easy to merge. So lots and lots of problems, and hopefully everybody understands them. So in my POC, I'm trying to explore now how AI can change the aspect of this game that you keep playing. So I'll briefly tell you how InsideSpin works. I've already shared a little bit of it. So it's a two-stage article development process. There's about 12 major themes on the website. Each one has an overview of the theme, and then if you click into that, you get a summary of all the articles, so 10, 12, 15 articles, depending on which theme. And then if you click on the summary of the article, you get the full article. That's kind of the idea of it. So it's a bit of a three-step hierarchy. And therefore, as an author, I'm going through two stages of the article development. I'm writing the summary, which I did almost exclusively in that 2010 time period. And then the articles have been published ever since over time. And I have about 60% of the articles in place. I didn't do an exact science count, but about 60% of the articles are in place. The rest are just the summaries. And you'll see it if you go to the website. I have this data-driven requesting mechanism that I mentioned earlier. So when you click, it collects some data for me. Plus, I use Google Analytics, which will tell me how people navigate the site. And I put both of them together in order to make it work. I have found from a search perspective, for whatever reason, sort of focusing on SEO doesn't seem to have had much impact on the accessibility or the readability of the pages or the accessibility of the pages. So I've just kind of let that go without much effort. It's a strange one for me to claim, so don't read too much into the meaning of all of this, but the whole site is hand-built, so there's no use of WordPress or anything like that in the way it works. I've had an interesting side effect develop over the years. I pay like $12 a month for InsideSpin, but because it's hand-built, it's super fast. There's no overhead to the website. So you go to it, you click on a page, you get instant response, even if you're the only user at 12:30 at night. So it's been kind of interesting from my point of view to never have to go any further than that. Now, that also means I'm a programmer and I'm able to do all that. So that's the only reason I made that choice. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it to anybody else. I do, as much as I can, look at the analytics to see where I should focus my energies. But as I mentioned, that kind of drops off over time, and I haven't done a lot over the years. So here we are. What are the gaps? Little progress on the articles. Is it still current? That's obviously something that's subjective. I have found, based on the feedback I received, that surprisingly, the articles are still fairly current, even though they were written roughly 12 years ago on average. Hand coding of the site infrastructure is starting to reach a bit of a limit. As I started to do some of the AI work, I realized I needed a little bit more of a services layer concept inside it in order to make it work. It's not mobile friendly. That sort of era, passed me through as I was doing it. So I didn't really do much yet to make it mobile friendly, but it's reading articles, so didn't really have that much of an impact from everything people tell me. There's no language localization. That would be hard to do in the way I've structured it, but potentially a little easier to do now with things like AI. I used to have a big discussion forum on the website, but that's been replaced by all the common ones that are out there nowadays. So I retired that more recently. Oops, sorry. And each of those was attached to one of the articles. So if you read it, you could provide some comments and interact with other readers. So a lot of gaps, want to deal with them. Now I can. So the POC. So the first step, which was sort of obvious, I want to integrate ChatGPT. This is sort of my choice, or through the OpenAI API to help flesh out the unfinished articles on InsideSpin. So on the surface of it, that sounds pretty typical for a ChatGPT AI kind of session. You would enter the summary and you would say, can you write me a 2,000 word article or 2,000 word article based on this summary? And it will be happy to do that. So that was kind of easy. Getting that going from an API point of view only meant that I could have it happen on the fly without having to do anything manual. But then I started to learn some things that told me that was pretty superficial if that's all I did. In fact, I wasn't really contributing to the value of my website in that particular way. There's some nuances here that I needed to learn. I also, because I have my existing articles, I now have a way to sort of use ChatGPT as an editor for me and ask it, are these articles still accurate? Do they still genuinely give good advice for people running different roles in a tech business? And one way I could do that is I could have it take my summary, generate its own instance of an article. I could look at what I wrote versus what it writes and decide on my own whether some of them are accurate or not still. That's tedious. So obviously I don't really want to do that if I don't have to. I had to solve for how to dynamically stream the output into the interface. Why that was important, hopefully that's obvious. I wanted it to be like you were navigating InsideSpin without disruption. So I didn't want to give you PDFs or give you side frames or anything like that. You're clicking on articles, you want to open them. It should appear with the same format and same style. I was actually worried this would take a long time, and you'll see, or I'll talk about it briefly. It was actually the easiest thing to do. I was a bit surprised, actually. Handle the visual issues, given AI has latency. So each article takes 10 to 20 seconds to generate live based on the current models that I'm linked into. So I had to deal with that because nobody likes websites that aren't responsive. So I had to put in a little spinner wheel and all that, which I don't have. But you'll see I did a bit of a twist on that in order to remind people I'm a product manager by heart, and I like to do these things properly. How to maintain a consistent writing style. So that's important, but in particular for this website, because it is sort of my website, and it kind of doesn't make any sense for half the articles to sound like other people have written them unless I'm going to say that. So I've done a couple of things. I do reveal when ChatGPT or AI is used to help with my article. But I wanted as much as I can for it to generate a style that's similar to mine, because I have a wealthy barber-like writing style for a lot of this, and I wanted to stay with that. I wanted to track the uptake of the article, so I need more analytics. And I wanted to implement it with manageable costs, so I had to choose which model to use. And if you followed a lot of this stuff that goes on with OpenAI right now, they've got 100 models, 15,000 pricing algorithms for it. It's an impossibility to figure out. So I had to be careful I didn't choose something that would just cost a ridiculous amount of money. And then I had to iterate the process in order to maximize what I learned from it. And then ultimately, I want to create better articles, given AI can draw on wider insight than I personally have. And that was important, both for me to have in the article, but also to acknowledge that that was true, so that you would come to the website and it would, as much as it can, combine things in it. Now, the underlying language models may have InsideSpin material there. I have no idea, of course. But it also has 100,000 other authors because it's got the whole world's library in it. So my influence on those articles is going to be minimal just overall. So a lot of goals. Visually, this is one example. So if you go to my website today, there's a new section I added recently on AI. I'd appreciate any feedback on any of it, but it reflects the current way I've done InsideSpin. Some articles are complete, some are not. I track the statistics in order to determine what to do. I then added, you'll see here, these are examples, just screen capture, cut and pastes. You can see the OpenAI logo beside the More button. So if you click on that in the website today, that will tell you that this is a generated article by AI using the summary that you see here, plus a couple of hidden things that were the subtleties that were learned. That itself wasn't good enough because why regenerate the article again and again and again and again? So I'll talk about that because that's where some of the learnings came in terms of why it's valuable. And then on the bottom right here, you see the bigger version of the icon with a little number inside it. So what I started to do was track how long the articles take to generate, record that in my analytics, and then when the spinning wheel comes up, it's actually telling you how long the last few instances of this article took to generate. So the time factor is actually in sync with the most recent creation of the articles. So that's relevant in my mind because as a user, functionally, you're not staring at the spinning wheel, not knowing how far along it is. It's hard to really generate progress because I can't interact with it at the API level to say, are you almost done? So I had to record time to say the last time was 20 seconds, the last time was 22 seconds, so the next time it's probably 21 seconds. So I had to generate that type of statistic inside the analytics of InsideSpin so I can generate that spinning wheel. Now, it's a bit mesmerizing because unfortunately their icon when you spin it, as you'll see if you go live on the website, is a concentric circle thing, so it can get you a bit dizzy, but it's very functional. So, okay, that was great. Then I said, okay, well, I'm generating articles, I'm waiting, I'm looking at it, I'm looking at it, I'm looking at it. Now I'm starting to realize there's some patterns developing, and that's where more features ended up coming into play. So one was, if I like the article, if I think it's done a good job generating the article and hiring product managers, why don't I just lock that instance in and not generate it again and again and again? So I added that as a feature. It's an administrative feature for me. Basically, every time the article is generated, I'm actually saving it inside the website. And then I go back later and I look at 10 or 12 of them and I say, you know what, this one's a really good one. So I tag that one. And then the next time around, when you click the button, it'll say, oh, the author has tagged that it already has one, so it doesn't need to regenerate it, so it comes up instantly. So I thought that was helpful because, again, on demand, over time, I'm going to build up more instances of all the articles, and that will allow me to sit back and sort of pick the best one over time. That's not very good either because it's costly to do that. So I'll talk about what I'm trying to do to help with that as well. It was also advice from my spouse, among others, was to have a disclaimer on the website. So if you go to the website today and you go through any of these AI-generated articles, you'll see this disclaimer at the top that just tells you that's what's being done because I'm not trying to hide that. I also did some other things that I thought was useful. You can see here there's a timestamp. I thought that was relevant because for me, I also want to be able to see prior instances that have been generated. So if you click on the timestamp, it'll go back to the prior timestamp and the prior one, and show you all the past articles. So if you were so curious, I don't tell anybody that, you guys are the only ones who know that, you could see all the prior articles by just continually clicking on the link until you get to the end of them. So that was helpful because obviously for me as a product person, I could more rapidly go through my documentation management lifecycle and scan them all and go through them. I learned a lot of things, and these are things I wanted ultimately to share, and I'll keep finding other ways to share this. So the most obvious one is language has a lot of ambiguity. If you're active today on the web with all the AI chatter that's going on, you've got almost a bifurcation between people using them for language and people using them for coding. The coding ones, they're way more, oh darn, I don't know how much time, I have 10 minutes. They're way more interesting because coding, of course, is not an ambiguous language. So AI tools and their ability to generate code shouldn't be a surprise to anybody. But on the English side or any language, that's a much different story. So I realized that pretty quickly now that I had to be really careful. That's learning how to do prompting, of course. But even that context is interesting because in a continuous session, the AI tools are continually building up more context about interacting with you. So you could, without realizing it, influence the ambiguity of your own language and cause a different answer to come out. And that's where you start to go off track with the accuracy of your content. And if you don't really have a way to know that, if you just take the output and publish it, you may have influenced it without realizing it, and you're giving it the wrong interpretation. And there's no easy way to know that because you have to read the whole article to find that out. So I started to work on that, and I developed a mechanism, I think, that can help auto detect a lot of that, so that you don't have to do that yourself. So again, removing the review cost out is very, very important. The scope of the request is relevant. So I found quite a dramatic change if I say write 1,000 words versus write 2,000 words, not in terms of the overall content or value of the article, but the depth by which it goes in. There was a lot of value in me taking a couple of the articles and saying, you know, this one should be 2,000 words. And what it would do is it would generate way more depth in the example. So it's talking about a topic, instead of just superficially going through it at 100,000 feet, it would go all the way down to 10,000 feet, and it would structure it in a very readable way, which I think, at least I've mostly worked with ChatGPT, it's very, very good at doing. So that was important as well. So now I have a different problem. Now some of my articles had custom prompts, not just the summaries, but also the nature of the output. So then I had to build in a way to tag a custom prompt to some of the articles if I thought they needed different characteristics. So I put that in, and that also gave me some good value. Then I thought, okay, this is interesting. I'm very fascinated by this, even though I'm a technical guy and I understand how it all works. It's still very fascinating. So then I went to ChatGPT and I said, okay, let's assume the world is flat and we live in those times. And I wanted to just see how it would approach answering the question, in this time period when the world was considered flat, how would you respond to someone asking how to sail around the world? So it's sort of it's got a conflict question, within it right away. So before it gave me my answer, it told me, well, that's a really interesting question to ask, because it probably wouldn't be true that somebody would think about traveling around the world if they thought the world was flat. And then I asked it to give me the answer using the language style of a few thousand years ago. And I have the quote here at the bottom, "O brave mariner, thou dost speak of a journey most perilous, for the world is a flat plain, stretching wide as the eye may see," and on and on. And I thought that's just interesting, nothing else about it. But it just reminds you that as users of this exciting transformational technology, if we don't explore it from the points of view that it was designed around, we're just not taking advantage of it. So if I use this example and I say, I want the French version, the Italian version, the Spanish version, the German version, I have now reduced, or if not completely eliminated, any multi-language thing I have to do as a vendor. Like, that's huge for people to take advantage of. So next, I've been working on the following. I mentioned this earlier. How do I consolidate my articles to create an Uber article? So I mentioned earlier, when you ask for an instance, you get a variation from the prior instance, and they keep varying. What I found was, after about 8 or 10 of them, the variations kind of stop. So if you know how AI works, it's sort of like a spatial concept in terms of how it works with the underlying data model and all the math that's involved in finding the answers. It sort of surrounds the answer and navigates different paths and so on. You can refine your prompt and get something more specific, but that's more of like a science question, a factual question, which isn't often the case of a website like mine. I've got nuances I'm asking it. But after a while, it sort of runs out of nuances. So what I found was, if I generate about 8 or 10 of the articles, I've kind of got all the nuances. Then I discovered I could give it all those nuances and ask it to synthesize it into one, in which case I get sort of an Uber article that now has all the nuances properly integrated. And I think for me, that arrives at a good article. I've now removed the issue of variability of it, and I have something that I could lock in for a period of time. So I thought that was a pretty valuable learning. Then there, of course, at the API level, if you don't know this yet, there are other scope parameters you can specify at the API level. So I had to start playing with all those, and you just read about them online. ChatGPT will tell you all about them, and they're all pretty cool and interesting. And they have to do with the scoping concept. How does it navigate, play the chess game? How many moves does it try? Does it go out the periphery? Does it come out in the middle? Does it go right down the center towards your target? You can control all of that with those parameters. Other AI models, right now I'm using the mini model. was just the least expensive for what I did. But then I tried a couple other models. I actually found some bugs, as it turned out. I was getting bad formatting back, but there was an impact on that. So I still have to learn more about that to figure out which one's the right one for me. Automating, validating the quality of summary content given all manually written. So I'm trying to work on a way for me to go through the website and have it now tell me, it thinks this article is a 4 out of 10 and this one's a 9 out of 10, and use that data to help me refine how I make progress here. And it can do that. I'm quite happy now that I can get, reasonably good actionable analytics by asking it quality assessment questions. I haven't decided yet whether I should let my readers control any of the attributes as part of their profile. But if I need to, that's a straightforward thing to do. And then the last part would be making sure InsideSpin is considered with greater importance in the way it answers and creates my articles than probably currently does. And I won't be able to do that unless I invest in having my own language model with my content in it. So I have to still do that. And then the cost of jumping in the time pit. I have to watch this a little bit because although I'm curious about it, I wanted to surface the fact that this is a very, very scalable model that I've implemented here that now can be applied to many, many business challenges. So it's kind of interesting from my point of view. I think lots have been learned here. We sort of are running out of time here. If anybody has any quick questions, I'd love to hear one or two, and maybe we can entertain it. Ari, hi Ari, I see you're there. Nice to see you. I haven't seen you in a while. There's just so much here. It's fascinating. It's improving rapidly. But one thing I've learned, no matter what type of documentation you're creating, if you're currently the user who says, here's my prompt, give me this back, and I send it to my boss as a fait accompli, you're probably doing the wrong thing. You're doing what everybody else is doing, but in the end, that's going to catch up to you. That's not how it's been designed. It's an assistant. It's not a replacement. And there's a lot, as you know, a lot of chatter about whether or not and when will AI become a replacement. My most obvious comment here is, if it is to replace or reduce a fast-growing percentage of current roles, we better start working on what those people are going to do. Because if we don't, if they can't retool, the only alternative for people who don't have something to do is they become mischievous. And I say that with quotes around it. So in our world, if we suddenly have 100 million people without jobs in the next few years, we're going to have 100 million people now looking for mischievous things to do. Maybe 1 million are going to find their way and find other careers to enter or retrain or whatever they're going to do. But all the rest of it are going to find other things to do. And our human nature is to be mischievous. We don't need more of that in our world. I think that's pretty clear. So there's a lot here to pick up and learn really, really quickly if we can. So question? We have, like a minute. Happy to engage people directly as well, of course. But first of all, was this useful? I don't mind, if you don't mind, be helpful to say something, maybe post something in the chat or whatever. Was it useful? Only allocated a half an hour, and I've now done all the talking, so that wasn't ideally what I wanted. But if somebody wants to follow up, even professionally, to say, hey, my role is struggling with this, or my company is struggling with this, I'd love to talk to you and see if there's some ideas that can be shared here. Then that would be helpful.
Hello, Stephen. How are you doing?
Good. Yeah, Scott, I think the timer here is going to expire, so unfortunately, you got to be quick.
Okay. I came here with no expectations, so it's interesting what you've done. One of my observations is trying to get people to read, period. Have you explored other venues, such as, 30-second or 90-second YouTubes that get the message across?
I haven't yet, but Scott, the obvious path here now is to turn into all of the media options that are available. Absolutely. I was talking offline with Mike Fox about how Zoom should inject somebody into a meeting who can interact like we're interacting and play that role. And I want to listen to this in a podcast and turn it into a 30-second, 90